Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare, so settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have gifts, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Oh, look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee.
You sure? It's cultist coffee.
What makes it cultist coffee?
I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it.
Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
There we go. No, what I was just saying, let's try this again. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So here's what was going on. I was just saying that I had to reset my entire system last night. Should hear me now. And because I mean, basically I had to fix a whole bunch of computer problems yesterday. I got all ready to start to work on layout for Trial of St. Gabriel, and then realized my computer wasn't working and basically had to reset everything, and was still resetting all of my live streaming stuff this morning, which included like getting the getting the microphone plugged back in. So yeah, so welcome everybody. Welcome back to after the complete system reset. So we're going to be looking at Phaser Wrists here, Adron's book, short cheat sheet on writing fiction. I was up and working this morning, writing this morning, and I was working late last night writing as well. We can talk about how that's going. Working through outlining the same way that that Adron was talking about in the Stomping Kittens book. And that was going well. I realized last Tuesday, and I had a discussion with James Bacon after our discussion on Tuesday about, okay, really why this isn't working. And it's one of the issues is that it's in the wrong age category. The first story really needs to be a middle grade story. And I've been focused on the hero's journey. And as the hero's journey has been going, that was really set up, or the way I had set it up was really setting it up to be a story where the protagonist is a male of prime military age like Luke Skywalker. And so one of the problems was that it just wasn't working for what was supposed to be a younger protagonist. So I'm not scrapping everything that I had done, but that needs to be like the character's like fourth story, not his first story. So I've gone back to the drawing board. Been working. I thought this was a great way to go. Spend an hour working on outlining. Now I'm working on outlining again. So spending an hour a day working on outlining. But I got to write too. I got to get writing done. Like, where are the words? And so actually, I also had some other ideas. And so I went back to some of the other stories that I was working on and got words written. So that's fantastic. So, all right, got to go back and re-outline and re-brainstorm this other story, but actually got words written in other stuff. So it's been good. Good morning, Robert. Good morning. Good to see you. Yeah, I noticed that in the Raven Keep, I haven't been able to get in on all of that, but there's been some great discussions on good and evil going on in the Raven Keep Discord server. So here's the Raven Keep Discord server link if you need to get in on that, because there is a lot of conversations going on over there. Cooking up 10 pounds of bacon. Oh, I bet it does sound great. Smell great in there. The expression when somebody's talking, then realize there's no audio is always priceless. Yeah, I'm sure. Good morning, Lynn. Good morning, Lynn. All right. In the cheat sheet, which we're looking at right now, the cheat sheet, or we'll be looking at as our main topic, I touch on how the Rubicon is a floater point and get much more specific about as to why. Hopefully that helps you with your story. I hope so. I hope so. That's why I wanted to look at this morning. I was almost looked at this earlier. But then I was like, no, wait a minute. Let's just do it on the morning grind, because your works have been really popular here on the morning grind. So I just won't look at it. So I haven't looked at it at all. But after this morning's work. So let me show you what's going on here. So over here on Table Talk, how many subscribers did we have on the Table Talk channel yesterday? I don't exactly remember. But if you're not subscribed over there, when I woke up this morning, I saw that we have 790 subscribers over there on Table Talk. So wasn't it 600 and something, like 680 or something like that yesterday morning? I mean, it seems like all of a sudden a lot of people, wait, hold on, maybe I can actually see how many people came in yesterday. I was kind of shocked. Yeah, 109. It says on December 1st, 109 people subscribed to the channel. That's pretty incredible. So 109 yesterday. Wow. Yeah, at this rate, we will hit 1,000. And it'll be fun to reach 1,000. Also, because I feel like also once we have 1,000 subscribers, it also gives a bit more social cred to the conversations, so that other guests will be willing to come in if they don't know, who we are and stuff like that. So that's been great. So Sunday, the conversation with Brianna will premiere about Scarface and corruption arcs and fall arcs. So that's happening. And then on Tuesday, right here, live 3 days, December 5th, 7 o'clock p.m., Doug, Brianna, and Cameron Pasha will be on the show to talk about the Christmas Story. So speaking of the Christmas Story, one of the things we're going to be talking about is the trial of St. Gabriel. So let me put the Kickstarter link right here. And the reason my primary task right now is making sure the revised version is relayed out. And I've been learning Vellum. And at the end here, if we still have time, I'll show you some of Vellum if you need a book layout program. I'm still learning it. I'm hoping it solves a lot of problems that I have. But I want to put everybody who is getting a digital edition of the Trial of St. Gabriel, I will send that out as soon as I have the new laid out version this weekend. And then that will be part of the conversation on Tuesday. We're going to talk about the biblical stories from St. Luke and St. Matthew, the literary perspective as well, all of that. But I do want to talk about having adapted the Christmas Story to what I created. So we'll be talking about all of those things. That's probably going to be a fantastic conversation on Tuesday. The whole team is together. Everybody's favorite team. Now, actually, I already do have next Thursday lined up. I got an email that Maxwell Alexander Drake can be here next Thursday. Oh, that's Adron's. So Maxwell Alexander Drake, who is of Starving Writer Studios, and he wrote one of the first books on writing and story structure that I read and I thought was really useful, because as we've talked about, some of the times these books on writing just are not really useful. But this is his series, Drake's Brutal Writing Advice. Seems like the kinds of works on writing that we like here have this brutal writing philosophy. Adron does. But Drake's Brutal Writing Advice, Maxwell Alexander Drake. I saw him at a presentation at Gen Con. I went to see when I was at the Writers Symposium at Gen Con. This was many years ago. He was giving a presentation, and so I went to see his present. I didn't know who he was. I just went to see his presentation. I guess the title of the presentation looked interesting. It was about story structure and stuff. I thought it was a fantastic presentation. So if you ever if you're ever someplace and he's giving a presentation and you're interested in all the story side of this, then you should definitely go and see Maxwell Alexander Drake. And then basically, as soon as the presentation was over, I walked right over to his table and bought Dynamic Story Creation. So we're going to be talking to him Thursday. So I have spoken to him before. He was part of some of the general geekdom panels, but I haven't re-uploaded that someplace. I'm not sure where they go. I think that they need to go over to the Table Talk channel, since I don't really distinguish anymore between the show Table Talk and general geekdom. They both kind of melded together, and I think in a great way. So I have talked with him before, so I want to put some of his insights back on Table Talk. That'll be coming later. But anyway, Drake, Maxwell Alexander Drake goes by Drake. He says, throughout my 20-year career, I've earned accolades by crafting tales for industry giants such as Sony's EverQuest Next and Catalyst Game Labs Shadowrun, with tales coming soon from the famed Harn World RPG setting. And we've talked about the Harn World RPG setting on this channel. So and then not only does he write the stories, but he also has the Drake's Brutal Writing Advice and Story series. So that's going to be really great. So if you're interested in that, I expect this to also be a fantastic conversation with him. All right. And then today, our main topic for the day is going to be this right here, the Great Fiction Cheat Sheet, A Stomping Kitten's Companion from the Right Club series by Adron Smitley, who is here in the chat under Razor Fist, under Phaser Wrist, rather. All right. But first, everybody got your drink this morning? I quickly mixed up some lemonade in this canteen cup here. All right. So first of all, let's go. I got to get my iBooks ready and everything. Like I said, I'm having to reset everything. Get your drink ready. All right. I got mine. Everybody, let's breathe 2 deep breaths in, complete exhales, and then take a sip of your favorite beverage. So here we go. Let's sip. Here we go. And sip. All right. So this is from Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. My shadow career. My shadow career, I've had more than one, was driving tractor trailers. In my late 20s and early 30s, I drove trucks for a living. I drove up and down the East Coast out of Durham, North Carolina, and later cross country, based out of Seaside, California. I was in deadly earnest and committed 100% to making my life as an over-the-road trucker. What I was really doing was running away from writing. Driving trucks was, for me, a shadow version of writing, because being a truck driver was, in my imagination, powerful and manly, just as I imagined being a writer would be. It was interesting. It was never boring. It was a career I could take pride in, an occupation that felt right to me. Driving trucks was honest labor. You worked for $1 and you got paid $1. The men I drove with were salt of the earth, stand-up guys, just as I aspired to be. And it took courage to be a trucker. Rolling over the mountains at night from Western Carolina and Virginia into Western Virginia was serious business. Wicked uphills followed by drop-dead downhills, around breakneck curves, most of them unlighted and unmarked. So that in order to carry speed into the next uphill, which you had to do, or the ascending grade would drop you down into creeper gear with every other trucker on the mountain piling up behind you, cursing. You had to keep your right foot nailed to the floor while letting 60,000 pounds of truck and load plunge you downhill as fast as you could. Then there was the romance of being on the road. I loved the road because it always took you somewhere. You were never stuck in one place. Delivering a load to a factory or a warehouse, you could hang out with the locals and shoot the breeze. But I always knew that, while they were trapped, I was free. In a few minutes, I'd be clear of town and rolling down the highway. Of course, this was all self-delusion. The road was taking me nowhere. I wasn't writing books. I wasn't facing my demons. I was spectating it live through the movie screen of a cab over windshield, while every mile I traveled only carried me further away from where I needed to go and from whom I needed to become. Powerful stuff. All right. Today, so I'm trying to get as much done as I can. I made a lot of progress yesterday. Need to make a lot of progress today. I'm wondering, though, there's a football game this afternoon, and I'm wondering if I'm going to have time to go and watch a bit. I've watched almost no football this year. But there's a lot to do. I got to get the book relaid out before I dive into more writing and experimentation with new software. All right. Let's take a look at our main topic today, which is the Great Fiction Cheat Sheet. And I did notice when I pulled this up, I haven't looked at this other than when I just pulled it up to start this. Let's increase the size that you can see it. It says, a big thanks to my friend and fellow writer Heath Robinson, who inspired me to write this. Please check out his YouTube channel, Heath's Geekverse. Thank you. Thank you very much for the credit here. Okay, so Phaser Wrist says, just so you know, this is the Great Fiction Writing Cheat Sheet is basically a 3,500 word fast crash course with everything extraneous removed so that everything in it is necessary. I also cover A New Hope and Revenge of the Sith at the end, while exploring the floater Rubicon. All right, let's see what's here. And also, I'm going to have a piece of paper in case I need to take some notes. All right. There exists only one plot in all of fiction. A hero goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. The difference between them is the protagonist's point of view. A good place to start yours is by utilizing the tried and true classic quest, an object to obtain and a limited time to obtain it. Star Wars: A New Hope. Object to obtain. Darth Vader is after the stolen plans. Limited time before the rebels can use them to exploit the Death Star's design flaw. The Matrix. Object to obtain. Agent Smith is after Zion's access codes. Limited time before the rebels can catalyze the one prophecy to free humanity. The Lord of the Rings. Object to obtain. Sauron is after the ring. Limited time before Frodo and his fellows can destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom. You see, most villains are after the same thing, power. In other words, to expand and or complete their dominance over others through tyranny and oppression. If they already control a village, let's see. Do I have my highlighter on? Well, whatever. Okay. If they're already in control of a village, then they seek to rule the whole region. If they already control a state, then they seek to rule the whole country. If they already control a continent, then they seek to rule the whole world. If they already control a galaxy, they seek to rule the whole universe, etc. But when the unanticipated happens because of some form of rebel alliance representing liberty and freedom who attempt to thwart them, which the missing piece protagonist usually isn't a part of at the beginning, though joins up at the shared cause, and eventually becomes its foremost true believer champion. So the villain's focus shifts to removing the rebel alliance in order to finish their stalled plans, which never works out when you throw a triumphant protagonist monkey wrench into the cogs. So the villain's focus shifts to removing the rebel alliance in order to... so Star Wars: A New Hope. Darth Vader wants to eradicate the rebels and finish the Death Star to ensure the Empire's galactic dominance. The Matrix. Agent Smith wants to eradicate the rebels and ensure full control over the Matrix simulation, enslaving all remaining humans. The Lord of the Rings. The Fellowship of the Ring. Sauron wants to eradicate the Fellowship rebels and ensure his world-dominating power via the One Ring. When beginning your story from scratch, the two most important plot points are the Act 1 key event and the Act 3 climax. So yes, we got to get the... Okay, so we got the key event, Act 1 key event. So when beginning your story from scratch, we're going to have the Act 1 key event, and then the climax, and this is Act 1, and that was Act 3. An inciting incident has 4 main requirements. Okay, we've seen this before. It must happen to the protagonist. 2, we must present their first, not full, awareness of the story's central conflict. 3, it must be tailored to their dominant character flaw. And 4, it must be linked to the antagonist. So I think those are great. The difference between the inciting incident and the preceding key event is the key event is what locks the protagonist into the story's central conflict, whether by choice or by force, but most importantly, it represents your story's dramatic question that the Act 3 climax will eventually answer in either a resounding yes, triumphant protagonist, or resounding no, tragic protagonist. So the key event presents dramatic question. Presents the dramatic question. The difference between the inciting incident and the preceding key event is the key event is what locks in the protagonist to the story's central conflict, either by choice or by force. But most importantly, it also presents your story's dramatic question that the Act 3 climax will eventually answer with either a resounding yes, triumphant protagonist, or a resounding no, tragic protagonist. This all-important dramatic question establishes the protagonist's main objective for the rest of the story, that is Act 2 and beyond, and is one of 3 things which they will seek to achieve. 1, possession of something. 2, relief from something. Revenge for something. To simplify, Act 1 exists to present the story's dramatic question. Act 2 exists to debate the story's dramatic question, and Act 3 exists to answer the story's dramatic question. You should never open your story with backstory, because if the backstory is so damn important, then it wouldn't be backstory. It would be the story. So where to place it instead? What happens between Act 1's inciting incident and the key event is something special, because that's where the protagonist is trickle-fed more relevant information about the story's central conflict, and it's interwoven with the first real brunt of backstory, thus killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So between inciting incident and the key event, so this is in Act 1, that is a good place to put the backstory by feeding it to the main character, because the main character wouldn't know these things. The person in the story that needs to be informed of these things, like the reader does. Star Wars: A New Hope. Between Luke accidentally triggering the holographic message, inciting incident, and finding his aunt and uncle dead, key event, Obi-Wan saves him from the Sand People. Then they have a revealing conversation, providing more of the story's central conflict while interweaving it with plenty of Anakin and Empire backstory. The Matrix. Between Neo meeting Trinity at the club, the inciting incident, and taking the red pill, the key event, Neo learns why the agents are after him, courtesy of his interrogation, and how they intend to use him to get to Morpheus, courtesy of the bug implant removed from his stomach on the way to meet Morpheus. The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring. Between Frodo witnessing Bilbo's inexplicably vanishing during the Big Birthday Bash, the inciting incident, and leaving the Shire with the One Ring as its temporary ring bearer, the key event, Frodo learns more about the ring's history and why it's so desired by evil forces, courtesy of Gandalf. So Robert says, that's where I'm stuck. Lots of backstory. So where to begin? Phaser Riff says, the key event almost always ends Act 1, and it's right before the physical crossing that transitions Act 1 into Act 2. Robert says, I need to fabricate exigent circumstances that will compel the protagonist to proceed on the quest. Okay, so instead, open your story by establishing protagonist empathy before the inciting incident. Otherwise, we won't care. It's easy to do by using my save the cat and kick the dog scenes in any number and sequence thereof. Save the cat is just a metaphor for showing your protagonist doing something admirable, not necessarily virtuous, to establish likability. And kick the dog is another metaphor showing your protagonist suffering in an undeserved misfortune to establish sympathy. This combination of events is crucial because likability plus sympathy equals empathy. Also show the flawed protagonist's 3 slices of life: home, work, and play, social, to establish relatability. This gives us a glimpse of what is most important to them during their everyday life of enabling circumstances before the inciting incident comes along to challenge these enabling circumstances, which is what all inciting incidents must do. Because the enabling circumstances is what shows the protagonist's dominant character flaw to fester unchallenged, and without the inciting incident, it would remain unchallenged. But most important, their dominant character flaw is what your story is really all about when everything else of lesser value is stripped away, since every story is about one thing above all: protagonist change, whether positive, triumphant, or negative, tragic. So what's the difference between them? First, know that if you have a triumphant protagonist, then you automatically have a tragic antagonist, and vice versa. Secondly, understand that every protagonist has 2 antagonists, internal and external. The internal antagonist is the protagonist's dominant character flaw, which they begin their story afflicted with. The external antagonist is the villain, whom is the physical manifestation of the protagonist's dominant character flaw. So in essence, you have 2 climaxes: internal antagonist Rubicon confrontation at the end of Act 2B, and the well-known external antagonist climax confrontation at the end of Act 3. This is extremely important because what happens during the Act 2 Rubicon climax determines what happens during the Act 3 climax. And when I was talking to other people, I've got this particular scene like this that's built that indicates this kind of thing. What does this need to be built around? And then and everybody seems to love that one scene. I'm like, yes, this is a fantastic scene. Build the story around that, and it's at the end to get to this moment. And then when I started doing all the other things, I actually got away from that moment. And it's because this particular moment works well for a middle grade fiction story and not as well for like a Luke Skywalker prime military age. It works when he's younger. So if it had to move to an older audience, it no longer worked and it got dropped. So I did ask Lou. Lou does middle grade fiction, Lou Anders. And I was looking for material on anything I needed to know specifically to brush up on about writing middle grade fiction. Of course, Lou's done the Thrones and Bones trilogy that I have over here. So he writes in the middle grade, or has written in the middle grade genre. So I was briefly looking for, what's the definitive book or something that tells me information on specifically writing a middle grade fiction. It seems like family friendly is and Lou brought this up as well, that a middle grade like movie, like a script, an outline for like a middle grade movie script is probably something like a family friendly fantasy. And I think that's the case I'm going with here too, like a family friendly fantasy. Maybe that makes it middle grade. The triumphant protagonist eventually confronts the internal antagonist during the Rubicon and overcomes their dominant character flaw by embracing its opposite virtue, and this is what empowers them to win against the external antagonist as their reward during Act 3 climax, because they become the physical manifestation of the virtue. By the way, Adrian, when I was thinking about Maxwell Alexander Drake and having discovered him and his work in writing by doing a presentation or going to a presentation by him at the Gen Con Writers Symposium. You should do things like that. You should take this material and put together like a presentation. I don't know who runs the Gen Con Writers Symposium anymore. It used to be Mark Tassin, who's been on the channel and on Table Talk as well. But I don't know who runs that now. We've talked about potentially going to Gen Con as media. I think that would be fun, and like shoot the morning grind from Gen Con and do some table talks at Gen Con with people. But also there is the Writers Symposium, and there is the Writers. I don't think they call it Writers Alley; they call it Artists Alley. But there is the Writers portion where you've got the different tables. I don't really see myself ever setting up a gigantic booth at a convention again. But, I was thinking, just because I've been there, done that's a whole lot of work, and especially since I'm just one person, man, it was two people, man, it's a massive amount of work to set up like a gigantic game booth at Gen Con. But I could go and set up, I would consider setting up a writer's table. Robert says, I don't think my protagonist can overcome her dominant character flaw anytime soon unless the flaw is what's preventing her from proceeding on the quest. Oh, Phaser says, I would, but I'm lazy, LOL. Robert says she has an overall flaw that's overcoming would end the story. Well, that would be, so that's, or is that the Rubicon point? The tragic, see, Phaser Risk says, funny enough, I was going to do a presentation at my local library and decided to write it down first, and that's how Stomping Kittens came about. I wrote it in like 6 hours, and voila, I had the book. Wow. I bet you could, sometimes people want you could do it probably without like PowerPoint slides and stuff like that. I would go light on text on PowerPoint slides anyway. Just like the key headings and bullets, like what are the key headings from Stomping Kittens, and like put those on PowerPoint presentations. That way you kind of use as notes and know where you are, because you know all the material. I bet you could do a fantastic presentation based on just that. And then I bet a lot of people would come over and buy Stomping Kittens from you. I bet it would be the exact same thing that happened to me with dynamic story creation. A tragic protagonist eventually confronts the internal antagonist during the Rubicon and surrenders to their dominant character flaw by rejecting its opposite virtue, and this is what condemns them to lose as punishment during the Act 3 climax. And here is where the two protagonists differ at the most, because a tragic protagonist becomes the physical manifestation of their dominant flaw during the Rubicon, but the antagonist already exists, so the protagonist must replace the old antagonist, either directly or indirectly, to become the new antagonist, and then battle the physical manifestation of the virtue character and lose as punishment. That's like Anakin Skywalker fighting Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Rubicon is so damn important because the Act 3 climax determines must be the physical manifestation of the virtue character versus the physical manifestation of the flawed character. Actually, there we go. That's how I highlight. With a triumphant protagonist, you already have that outcome as an inevitability, but with a tragic protagonist, it becomes slightly more complicated because you cannot have two antagonists in the same story, so one must replace the other. I call this the antagonist replacement theory to sound like I'm smart. You also must replace the former protagonist with a new protagonist who embodies the virtue now that the antagonist embodies the flaw. I call this the protagonist replacement theory to sound like I'm even smarter. For example, in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, General Grievous is the antagonist, one of many secondary puppet antagonists to Palpatine, yes. But consider them the Saruman and Sauron pairing here, since Star Wars isn't a standalone story, but a series in which Palpatine gets his comeuppance later on. And Obi-Wan kills Grievous during the midpoint. At the same time, Anakin aids Palpatine against Mace Windu to become Darth Vader. Thus, the old antagonist, Grievous, is replaced with the new antagonist, Anakin. This then leads to the climax where the new physical manifestation of the flaw replacement antagonist, Anakin, battles it out with the new physical manifestation of the virtue replacement protagonist, Obi-Wan, and is punished with the defeat for his Rubicon decision of surrendering to his dominant character flaw. Phaser Risk says, I was just going to wing it and decided I should write it down in case I made an ass out of myself in front of everyone. Hey, Zero the Blade, good morning. Yep, Anakin, so yeah, this was the exact example that we were going to right here. Do you now see why tragic protagonists are that much harder to write and should only be tackled by experienced authors? For the same reason, it's much harder to plot out a trilogy than a standalone novel. For example, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. The midpoint of the Fellowship story by itself is the Council of Elrond, in which Frodo interrupts all of the arguing with his declaration that he will take the One Ring to Mordor, though he does not know the way. But for the overall trilogy, the Council of Elrond is not the midpoint, but the Act 1 key event. See the problem? If you don't have a firm grasp on plot, trying to map out an entire trilogy as well as each of its individual books will only lead to confusion because the plot points won't match up while getting all jumbled in your head. Even established authors who have a hard time writing trilogies, let alone an entire series of novels because of this, which is why most of them don't bother. That's why it's well advised, or at least for your first several novels, to plan them as standalones. Asterisk here. A quick bit of explanation on the whole physical manifestation term. Take the movie Jaws as a perfect example. The man-eating great white shark antagonist is the physical manifestation of protagonist Brody's dominant character flaw of aquaphobia, fear of open water. Brody must overcome his aquaphobia in order to kill the shark in the middle of the ocean during the Act 3 climax. When you strip 99% of everything away from your protagonist, their age, race, and gender, because none of that matters, what you have left are their three most essential character traits, their wound, shield, and sword, or their scar, their dominant character flaw, and its opposite virtue. The wound is a traumatic event, or more typically a past traumatic event, that has the emotionally, psychologically, or sometimes physically scarred the protagonist. From this wound, you get their shield, or their dominant character flaw. The shield is what they carry and hide behind because they believe, at least on a subconscious level, that it protects them from ever being wounded in that way or similar kind of way ever again. Think of it as their defense mechanism through every situation you put them on. And from the shield, we get their sword, or its opposite virtue. The sword is the panacea that provides the possibility to alleviate the protagonist from the burden of their dominant character flaw and eventually achieve their full potential through character growth. It doesn't guarantee it, as with the tragic protagonist, but it does provide that possibility. Lynn says, I've never thought of The Lord of the Rings as a trilogy. It's closer to one long novel published in 3 volumes. Yeah, Phaser Wrist was talking about, we talked about the trilogies together. Now, of course, The Lord of the Rings was also published very close together, especially by modern standards. I mean, the books all didn't come out at once, but they came out one after another pretty fast. Like the next year or something like that. Wait a minute, let's get it. So it's not like you were waiting around. Lord of the Rings publication dates. The Lord of the Rings was first published over the course of a year. So, okay, see, all of them came out within a year. From 29 July 1954 to 20 October 1955 in 3 volumes rather than under the titles, in 3 volumes rather than 1. So you didn't really have to wait around for that. It was not like today where, let's leave somebody on a cliffhanger and then maybe 10 years later we'll get another book, or maybe never. So that was kind of also different. Robert says, the George Lucas trilogy is a victory followed by a defeat followed by a victory. Robert says, The Lord of the Rings is a defeat followed by 2 victories. I want to study later. We haven't gotten around to writing sequels yet. Not ready for that. But once we do, everybody talks so much about the story structure of Star Wars, which, by the way, we're going to talk to Drake about, because Drake did say something that was fascinating to me during I think it was that presentation, that he said that he was going to explain why the prologue, effectively, of Star Wars is completely unnecessary, but it was tangential to the point that he was making at that time during his presentation. And he said, ask him about that later. And I never got to. So on next Thursday, I'm going to ask him about his take on Star Wars, and I'm going to see if it lines up on my theory about the relationship between Luke Skywalker and R2-D2. So that will be part of the topic with Drake. And I also want to talk to him about writing for these other properties and what that's like. From the shield, we get their sword, or its opposite, virtue. The sword is the panacea that provides the possibility to alleviate the protagonist from the burden of their dominant character flaw and eventually achieve their full potential through character growth. It doesn't guarantee it, as with a tragic protagonist, but it does provide that possibility. The wound is the reason for the shield, and the sword is the panacea virtue of the shield's flaw. Common reoccurring wound scar equals shield flaw versus sword virtue arguments exist throughout staple genres, such as, but not limited to, horror, phobia equals fear versus courage, superhero loss equals doubt versus faith, romance equals betrayal, or betrayal equals fear versus love. And sometimes the flaw versus virtue argument is character role specific, as with the typical selfish versus selfless antihero. Basically, the wound provides an emotional detriment. The shield is an insecurity because of it, and the sword is a panacea to the shield. Same as with the story's dramatic question. Act 1 exists to present your flaw versus virtue argument. Act 2 exists to debate your virtue versus flaw argument. And 3 exists to reward or punish the Rubicon verdict of your flaw versus virtue argument. This is your scarred protagonist character growth in a nutshell, which provides necessary change, whether positive or negative. And once it's complete, their story is finished. At least for the first novel, though if you plan a sequel, then the protagonist's wound in the second novel is something traumatic or tragic that he's experienced and carry over from the previous novel. I love that. That this is, your story's finished once you resolve that. I really like that. But if you want to go on with the same character, which is something I've been thinking about a lot, I haven't exactly solved this yet, but I do think about that a lot, that, in that novel, then, if you want to use the character again later in a sequel, go ahead and set up that flaw, the new wound, in that first book. Excellent. That's really neat. There are 7 basic plot point outline formula. Act 1, inciting incident. The protagonist first, not full awareness of the story's central conflict. Key event. 2, key event. The event that locks the protagonist to the story's central conflict while becoming half committed. Act 2A, pinch point. The protagonist discovers new clues about the story's central conflict as the stakes are raised. 4, midpoint. The protagonist realizes the true nature of the story's central conflict, shifting them from reaction to proaction while becoming fully committed. Act 2B, punch point. The protagonist is forced to question how much they are truly willing to pay to resolve the story's central conflict. 6, anchor point. The stakes are raised and the protagonist's debt is paid while becoming absolutely committed. Act 3, climax. The protagonist confronts the external antagonist and either succeeds, triumphant, or fails, tragic, by finally answering the story's dramatic question with either a resounding yes, triumphant, or resounding no, tragic. Rubicon. The protagonist confronts the internal antagonist as their dominant character flaw and either overcomes it, triumphant, or surrenders to it, tragic, becoming the physical manifestation of either the virtue, triumphant, or the flaw, tragic. Although the Rubicon typically takes place at the end or immediately after the Act 2B anchor point, it can just as well happen anywhere in your story during or after the midpoint, all depending upon your particular story and how you wish to tell it, thus proving the plot is not so paint by numbers as many pantsers ignorantly believe. This makes the Rubicon a floater point, which is why I've designated at no specific number. So this is the floating point. This is no specific number because its true number depends on which of the other major plot points, 4 to 7, you decide to attach it to. Well, maybe this speaks to something that Robert was just talking about there, because you've got a character that you've got to deal with, that you want to, that once the flaw is overcome, then the story's over. Well, in that case, it sounds like overcoming the Rubicon needs to go with 7. That seems like that's how it would be. And I guess, so is this also true? In that case, it's kind of that. In that case, it's also kind of like Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars, because he doesn't. I mean, he flies out to go defeat the Death Star, but he's not flying out there to use the Force. He doesn't really make his decision until right there at the end. He crosses the Rubicon, agreeing to turn off his targeting computer right there at the climax. Phaser Wrist says, I give 2 examples of that wound carryover at the end of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Once the flaw is overcome, the protagonist needs to prove the merit of overcoming it by defeating the antagonist, the triumphant protagonist. Once the flaw is overcome, the protagonist needs to prove the merit of overcoming it by defeating the antagonist. Okay, so let's take a look at Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, the tragic protagonist then. At its heart, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith is really a forbidden love story a la Romeo and Juliet. Anakin is a tragic protagonist, Padme is his secret wife, and his Rubicon is attached to the midpoint. Anakin's flaw versus virtue argument and fear versus faith stemming from the wound, carried over from the previous story, the Attack of the Clones. So Anakin's flaw versus virtue argument is fear versus faith, which stems from his wound carried over from the previous story, Attack of the Clones. Of his prophetic dream about his mother's death having come true, which instigates him into believing his dream about Padme's dying will also come true, and this drives the events of the entire story. Act 1, Inciting Incident. Padme tells Anakin she's pregnant, which only complicates the rule that Jedi Order members are forbidden to marry or have children. Key event, Anakin has what he believes is a prophetic dream about Padme dying in childbirth. Act 2A, Pinch Point. Anakin discovers Palpatine is actually Darth Sidious, the mysterious Sith Lord who has been manipulating the Republic, and whom offers to teach Anakin the dark side secret to saving Padme's life. 4. Midpoint. Jedi Master Mace Windu confronts Palpatine in a life-or-death struggle, but Anakin wants to know the secret of Darth Plagueis too much to let Palpatine die, so he aids him in killing Windu. Rubicon. Choosing fear over faith, Anakin pledges full allegiance to Palpatine, becoming the Sith apprentice Darth Vader. He kills all the Jedi in the temple, including the younglings, and then proceeds to the Mustafar planetary system to eliminate the separatist enemies of the Republic. Star. Oh, then we're going into Act 2B. Okay, so this is where Anakin becomes the antagonist replacement, as well as Obi-Wan becoming the protagonist replacement, because Obi-Wan kills General Grievous, the former antagonist, on Upata, or however you pronounce that, while Anakin is busy becoming Darth Vader. So then we go into Act 2B, which is Punch Point. Padme goes to Mustafar, refusing to believe Anakin is evil, while Obi-Wan has secretly stowed away on her ship in order to stop Anakin from killing him. To stop Anakin by killing him if necessary. 6. Anchor Point. Anakin refuses his last chance at redemption and accuses Padme of betraying him with Obi-Wan, and then strangles her unconscious with the Force. That's been a long time since I've seen this. Robert says it seems Luke's initial flaw is that he's stuck on the farm. He wants to go, but he's too afraid to go because he lacks faith. He's also very vested with technology at that point. On the moisture farm, I mean, you're dependent upon moisture even to live. I mean, the technology even to have water to live. So he's very, very wrapped up in tech. Act 3, Climax. Obi-Wan kicks Anakin's Sith apprentice butt as punishment and then leaves him for dead, after which Padme dies, giving birth to twins, Luke and Leia, fulfilling Anakin's prophetic dream. The story's dramatic question. Will Anakin get relief from his prophetic dreams by saving Padme's life? The answer is quite obviously a resounding no. So this is okay. So this is the protagonist wants relief from something. He wants relief from the torment of his prophetic dreams, especially regarding the death of his wife. Star Wars: A New Hope, the triumphant protagonist. Metaphorically speaking, Star Wars: A New Hope is a classic hero's journey about a young knight trying to save a princess from an evil castle. Luke is a triumphant protagonist, and his Rubicon is attached to the climax. Okay, so all right. Luke's flaw versus virtue argument equals doubt versus faith. Basically, a science versus magic story, or technology versus the Force. Stemming from the wound of having never known his true father, carried over from the previous story. Okay, so here we go right here. So the wound of having never known his true father, carried over from the previous story, Revenge of the Sith, for the sparse and partial truths his uncle Owen, then Obi-Wan, tells him about Anakin. So this is loss. He's never known his true father, and he experiences this loss. The death of his aunt and uncle give him conviction, but still not faith. The desperation of his imminent death of the rebellion, and then he takes the leap of faith. All right, well, let's see what it says in here. Act 1, Inciting Incident. Luke accidentally triggers Princess Leia's holographic message to Obi-Wan requesting help. 2, Key Event. Luke discovers his aunt and uncle dead, courtesy of the Empire, and joins Obi-Wan in leaving home. Act 2A, Pinch Point. After hiring passage out of Mos Eisley Spaceport ahead of Han Solo's Millennium Falcon, Luke and Obi-Wan are chased off the planet and under fire by the Imperial Star Destroyer. Midpoint. After emerging from Lightspeed to a destroyed Alderaan, the Millennium Falcon is captured by the Death Star's tractor beam, and they barely escape by hiding in Han's smuggling compartments. Luke then discovers Princess Leia as a prisoner aboard the Death Star and decides to rescue her. Act 2B, Punch Point. Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie are forced to hide in a trash compactor where the Diana sewer slug tries to eat Luke, and the Imperials then turn on the trash compactor to crush them. But they barely escape thanks to R2's intervention. 6, Anchor Point. Just as they return to the Millennium Falcon, Luke spots Obi-Wan dueling Darth Vader, during which Obi-Wan allows Vader to strike him down. Act 3, Climax. After escaping the Rebel base on Yavin 4, R2's plans are used to formulate an attack strategy against the Death Star, which is closing in because it tracked them. Luke joins the X-Wing fighters scrambling to head out to the battle. Rubicon. With Darth Vader hot on his trail, Luke hears the voice of Obi-Wan's Force Ghost telling him to use the Force. Luke switches off his targeting computer, choosing faith over doubt, trusting in the Force, and makes the otherwise impossible shot that blows up the Death Star. The story's dramatic question: will Luke get revenge, aka personal justice, against the evil Empire for the murder of his aunt and uncle? The answer is quite obviously a resounding yes. Phaser Risk says Luke deciding to rescue Leia is the from reaction to proaction midpoint reversal. Yes, that's when he begins proactive, and Luke starts to have some success because he does successfully rescue the princess. Now, she's still held at threat later because she's on Yavin when it's about to be blown up. But he does successfully get her out of there. And even has this hero moment when they have to swing over the pit. Yes, the will of the Force too. So the Great Fiction Cheat Sheet is a short and simple crash course for fast learning and future reference only. I go in much more in-depth in my Write Club series of plotting books, specifically Stomping Kittens, as well as in all my free writing articles on my personal author website, Adron J. Smitley at blogspot.com. Let me stick that in over here too. Yeah, this would make this condensed version right here, this would probably by itself be a perfect presentation. Like how long, like we didn't start, this was like, we've probably been looking at this for a little bit more than 30 minutes plus discussion. So like at 30-minute to hour presentation. And there you have it. That would be perfect. There you have it. The Great Fiction Cheat Sheet in all of its glory and splendor. You're welcome. Parting note, way back in 2014, when I published Punching Babies, a how-to guide, I mistakenly said the inciting incident of the Matrix is when Neo answers Morpheus's phone call at work. We all live and learn, and clearly I was wrong. But I've since lost the means for updating that book, so I'm mentioning the necessary correction here. That's another reason. Yeah, you can't always be around. You don't always have the. I'm sorry to hear that you've missed the ability to update that book, but that goes exactly to the kinds of things I was talking about when we were talking about the elf license and the reattribution clause with role of law. And I was thinking about that as I'm going through here and trying to figure out the reformatting and stuff like that. You can't have a clause. That's why I go, you can't have a clause that says you're required to update the attribution if somebody else wants you to reattribute it, because you might have actually lost the way to update it. Lynn says, great stuff. Learned a lot. Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this. I'm going to write you later, but I'm working again on the 1 hour of outlining a day to try to get the new thing going with a middle grade, like equivalent of an 11-year-old protagonist. I need to tell this story now with this protagonist being about 11 years old, and it needs to deal with questions that people of that age need to deal with. Actually, in the past, I've been very caught up on getting the protagonist to squire. The protagonist needs to get squired. But now I realize if he's like 11 years old, we need to make him a page. And there's a lot of drama between crossing the threshold, I suppose, of growing up, between becoming a page and becoming a squire. So you're going from being a page to being a squire to being a knight. And for some reason, up until, was that 2 days ago or 48 hours ago? For some reason, I've been wanting to tell the story of growing up, and coming of age. And for some reason had completely neglected that there's a transition from page to squire that's just as important, or could be just as important, just as dramatic in the story as going from squire to knight. And all of those things deal with different issues of your, that go on at that particular age, the kinds of things that and that's why also, I guess I was really drawn to that thing that I played, that love email that was sent out. And she said that was, which I just still think is hilarious and really enjoyed. And she said that was written at 10 years old. Well, that's very close to 11, which I'm kind of thinking is the age of this protagonist now in this story. And I want to have, the lighthearted kind of romance of childhood like that in it. And if I start with the protagonist much older, I miss that. And so I guess that's one of the reasons why I was kind of drawn to that as well. So I was like, man, so that's a window and insight into, love at 10 and 11 years old. I should capture that. I should capture that in the story. Phaser Wrist says, I lost that ability when transferring all my stuff from my old computer to my new one. I actually lost a bunch of books. Oh my God. Including my 4th Soothsayer series first draft. Oh my God. Well, you write 30,000 words a day, so maybe that'll go fast. I'm sorry. Phaser Wrist. Robert says, maybe there's a local bully needs to stand up to, and doing so gains the knight's attention. Yeah, you could have a trilogy, Heath, from book 1 from page to squire, book 2 from squire to knight, and then book 3 grand knight adventure. Yeah, and because I don't want to stretch the story. I want them, they have to be standalone. Like, this has to be a standalone story. So it's not, I don't want to phrase it like we're talking about this is just some thing that continues on. But I do want, like, in a particular story. So it's got to be a self-contained story, self-contained book. So now at this age, yeah, get him to page. Actually, I think he needs to actually spend a couple of books as a squire. Because one of the things I want to emphasize is how difficult it is to become a knight in this particular world. There's all the martial training as well. So you've got to be an expert warrior, but also what distinguishes a knight from just another soldier or a mercenary or something like that. There's also all the character building in here. So I'm trying to make sure the knights are great warriors in the kingdom, but also you really have to be of exceptional character in order to become a knight as well. So that's kind of like when you're a squire, the adolescent age, learning all these things about character building. So pages are night larvae and squire are night pupae. Yeah, basically. Right. Coming of age. Yes. Coming of age. Or he needs to deliver an important message. Yeah. So I'm re-brainstorming that. So that's gonna be fun. But in the meantime, so now I've said, if I could write for 3 hours a day, 1 hour, then I'm going to start the plotting again and going through that and trying to get that right. But on the other hand, I've got stuff about the angels that needs to be written, and so I said, all right, plotting done. Save that until tomorrow so that things can germinate and think about. And then I already basically know where I was going with one of the angel stories that never got finished and needs to be finished now. So I was just writing that, and that was going very well yesterday. So I'm going to get that out, and I want to work with some technology to try to put some of that out in video format. And only a small bunny could deliver it between enemy lines. Maybe. I've got an idea that Phaser says, remember, the easiest way to get your moral lesson is you're saying to the reader, if you're like my flawed protagonist at the beginning, then eventually do this at the Rubicon. Overcoming or surrendering to the flaw, then you get this reward or punishment, aka the climax. And so I'm thinking that this needs to be built like that scene that I thought of that people really like. It has to do with choosing others and being selfless rather than choosing yourself. So I want there to be an element of self-sacrifice. Actually, I think that self-sacrifice would continue through a lot of this. So I think it's great that it starts there. And it's also probably a good right at for that age. That's why I think that age works well. Because, 10, 11, things like that. I mean, naturally, when you're much younger than that, you're very self-focused. But at, 10, 11, that kind of thing, I think that's about the right time to realize that, to start realizing the importance of self-sacrifice or doing for others. So yes, selfishness. So yes, so that's what this needs to be built around. I'm still going to email you and we'll talk about it, but I'm going to do a bit more outlining because I have a feeling if I do a little bit more outlining and try to get this nailed down, you may be able to sit down with me for an hour and just have the whole thing plotted by the time we're done. But yeah, so I think that he needs to now, the problem is that I want to be sure that he's not, like Cameron talked about this. He can't be so selfish in the beginning that he's unlikable. So I'm not talking about like an unlikable level of selfishness, but I'm thinking of it needs to be presented in more of I'm becoming more self-aware, and then doing something that's sacrifices my something that I want in order to do something for others. And then when he does that, he gets noticed. That he thinks he's giving something up, but actually somebody important noticed this self-sacrifice that he made, and then that ushers him into becoming a page in the castle. Anti-heroes aren't the only protagonists who have that flaw versus a virtue argument, by the way. The selfish versus selfishness. I think that works. I think this kind of realization of the importance of self-sacrifice would work for a middle grade audience. All right, so I'm going to go get work done. So I've been actually extremely happy and over the past like 48 hours, especially since Tuesday when I made the realization again that, my stories for a too old protagonist. I've been doing a lot of stuff. I'm going to work on laying this stuff out. So I may be sending, once I get the layout for Trial of St. Gabriel, I'll send that out to everybody. But then also I got a lot of writing to do and work to do on that. And if I can, I got like 5 hours before the football game. And if I can make a lot of progress, I'll actually leave the house, go get a hamburger at the local sports bar and watch a little bit of this football game. Get me out of the house a little bit and not staring at this computer. Maybe talk to people. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Adron. I will talk to everybody later, and I will see you tomorrow on the Morning Grind. Later.